Welcome back to Blasting Off with Bootstrap. This is Level 4, Section 2, Navigating Navigation. So far, the only way to navigate between pages is that list of links way down there in the footer that very few people will ever see. In this section, we'll be working on adding a navigation bar at the top of our page that we can use instead. So here's what we'll be building in this section. We want the title of our page to really stand out, and we want our most important links to be easily accessible at the top of our page. Just as a refresher, here's our current page header that we'll be working with. We'll be replacing this entire row with a navigation bar using Bootstrap. One major difference for our navigation is that we will no longer be using a grid system. Because of that, we can remove our row and our call MD12 elements all together. So why aren't we using a grid here? Well, we'll want the width of the elements in our navigation to be determined by their content rather than by a grid system. We'll see how that'll allow us to build a more flexible navigation throughout this section. To get our links ready for our navigation bar, we can copy them from our footer and put them up here as well. These are all links to other pages in our site. If you remember how our footer looked when we first looked at it, you might have a guess as to what our page looks like so far. You can see that if we preview our updated page, our navigation has those default bullet icons next to them, kind of like all unstyled, unordered lists do. We will definitely work on cleaning those up, but first let's get that H1 converted to be a link back to our home page. Since we want this to be a link, we can get rid of that H1 tag that we added in earlier and convert it to a standard link using an A tag. Now that we've converted this into a link that points to our home page, we'll need to add a class of navbar-brand to it. This class specifies that the text or image represents your brand and will be positioned way over to the left side of the page. If we open this up in a browser, we'll see that we're making a little bit of progress. Our link element and our navigation list element are at least on the same line. The navbar-brand class is a great place for you to put your site logo as well. It's a common pattern that the very top left corner of your website links back to your home page, and it's where people will first look when they visit your site. Let's see what we can do to clean up our list of links next. One very easy change we can do is use Bootstrap's nav component by adding a class of nav to our UL element. This nav class specifies that the list items within this entire element are links, and then styles them accordingly. In our case, they will still appear next to our brand. You might ask why the beginning of our list is still appearing on the same line as our title. Well, our list is still starting at the same spot it was before, but because of this nav class, now all of our links are being carried down to following lines. The nav class is similar to btn or glyphicon. It's a starting point that we can use to say we're going to use a nav here. We'll still need to add another class to let Bootstrap know what type of navigation we want to use. There are a few possible nav modifiers available that we can use throughout our page, not just in our header. The nav-pills is a very common one and will cause the links to appear horizontally with a nice padding around each link with this cool border. The nav-tabs class handles creating a tabbed navigation bar, where the content below it could be relevant to the active tab. In this case, though, we want to use the navbar-nav class, which will cause our unordered list of links to appear inline horizontally, kind of like nav-pills, but without the same rounded borders. Lastly, we want our nav to be all the way on the right side of our page, separate from our brand position. To do that, we can add in a class of navbar-right, which will position our nav way over here. We can open this up in a browser and see that we now have a working navigation. It's positioned correctly due to that navbar-right class, and the navbar-nav class even adds some different background colors when we hover over each of those links. Things are getting there, but our navigation is looking a little too close to the rest of our page. Our goal navigation looked quite a bit different. Here's one more look at where we're headed on this. This navigation has a nice background that stretches all the way across the page, as well as some more muted colors for these links. Let's see what we need to do to get our page looking a little bit more like this. One simple but massive change to our page is changing this div that we've been working with into a navigation bar using Bootstrap's navigation component. To do that, we can add a class of navbar to our div that contains our brand and our list of links. By itself, this won't do too much. It's similar to the btn class that we used earlier. In order to specify a color scheme for our navigation bar, we can add a class of navbar-default to this element. If we checked out our navigation bar now, we'd see that it has this nice gray background with some muted colors for our text as well. Bootstrap has one other navigation bar theme called navbar-inverse, which is great for darker color schemes. Opening this up in a browser, we can see that our navigation bar is styled correctly, but it doesn't stretch all the way across the page. It's being centered like our content and looks very similar to our well we added earlier. What can we do to make this stretch all the way across the page? The reason our navigation bar shows up like this is because its width and its margins are being set by the container class, which keeps it centered in the middle of the page. What we really need is for our navigation to be separated from our container. Here's what the HTML for our navigation looks like right now. We have one div that is being centered thanks to our container class and has all of the styles for a navigation bar thanks to our other two navigation classes. What we want, though, is for our container to be inside of our navigation bar. To do that, we'll need to go ahead and create a new div that will surround our container and move our other two navigation bar classes onto that new div. Now, our gray styling for our navigation bar will stretch all the way across the page, but then the content within that navigation bar, it'll still be centered. This will now look like our goal navigation. Bootstrap's navigation component isn't required to be at the top of the page. Navigation bars could be positioned in the middle of the page or even at the bottom. The default navigation bar will have 4 rounded corners on it, kind of like our well element earlier, but we don't really want that in our case. To let Bootstrap know, we'll add one more class to our navbar, and that class is called navbar-static-top. This will let Bootstrap know that this navigation bar should be at the very top of our page. As you might guess, there's also a class for positioning a navigation bar at the very bottom of a page. There's a few other classes available for setting a fixed position as well. Fixed positions will always be visible on the page, so as you scroll, the navigation bar will always show up on top of whatever other content is on your page. It's a bit tough to describe these without an example, so let's take a look at what I mean. Here's the navigation bar using navbar-static-top. As we scroll down the page, the navigation bar goes away. Static just means that it's stationary and will scroll just like the rest of our page content. Now, if we change this up to be using a navbar fixed top class and then scroll down, we'd see that the navigation bar still shows up on top of the rest of our content. This would be useful if we had a very long page that had lots and lots of content and always wanted our navigation bar visible. When using navbar fixed top, you'll also notice that our navigation bar shows up on top of the content that follows it. To fix that, you'd want to add a little bit of padding to your body to help counteract the overlap. So we've talked quite a lot about navbar and nav, but what exactly is the difference between them? Well, think of the nav class as being a very basic building block of your entire site. You might have multiple navs on a page, Or you might have a subnav that shows up in your sidebar. Each could use one of the different nav styles that Bootstrap provides. For navbar though, you probably won't want to have more than one of these on your entire website. You could if you wanted, but that would most likely confuse people. That's about it for this section and level 4. It's time for you to navigate some navigation in the challenges, and we'll see you back in level 5. For you to try navigating navigation in the challenges. That's the name of the level. Time for you to try navigating navigation. For you to try navigating some navigation in the challenges, and we'll see you back.
I can't do it.
For you to navigate some navigation